In the heart of Romania lies Europe's last great wilderness. A wild and rugged land home to wolves, lynx, bears, bison, boar, and some of Europe's last primeval old-growth forests, this landscape has been described as the Yellowstone of Europe. Within 3 hours flight of every European capital, efforts are currently underway to protect this area as a massive 500,000-acre national park, linking it with other Carpathian parks to create a one-of-a-kind nature and biological reserve that benefits and supports the communities which surround it. Welcome to what could be the Fagaras Mountains National Park. All right, hello and welcome to part 2 of what is, I guess, a little mini-series I'm doing on conservation in the Carpathian Mountains of Romania. Part 1 was all about the Forest of Immortal stories and the tree I adopted for the channel. If you don't know what that is, you should definitely go give that video a watch because the Forest of Immortal stories is kind of like a little miniature version of what conservation in the Carpathians and the establishment of the Fagaras Mountains National Park could look like on a larger scale. It's kind of like a little test balloon. The idea is that you have the local conservation initiative, the Forest of Immortal Stories, whose benefits, economic development, public health, ecosystem services, biodiversity preservation, accrue to the local community, in this case the commune of Nucșoara, while at the same time, wildlife and natural resources are protected. If you scale that idea up over 500,000 acres, what you get is, hopefully, the Fagaras Mountains National Park, a landscape in which the people and local communities of this part of rural Romania benefit from the protection and preservation of their natural resources rather than the exploitation and destruction of them. If you watched my Japan video from a few weeks ago, you'll notice that this is a very similar situation. Europe and Romania, like Japan, has a long history of human settlement and disturbance, and the idea of applying a US-style fortress conservation approach here would not work. You have to figure out how to protect this landscape as a national park while accommodating and benefiting the people who live on it. That's what Japan did, and it is what the proposed Fagaras Mountains National Park is trying to do. And it's not an easy task, right? For one, with this approach to conservation, you have to get a lot of people to agree on a lot of different things. No easy task in the best of times, but it's especially difficult when you're talking about people's livelihoods, their families, their way of life. This is their home, not just a national park. You have to get people to agree on how the park will be managed, what restrictions will be in place, what does hunting look like, subsistence gathering, how much development is too much, how much tourism is too much, what about ski resorts? That's a big question in this area. These are all big questions in this area that require difficult answers. And so that need for consensus, for bringing together many different people with many different opinions on how this landscape should be managed and having them agree on what a national park will look like is a challenge. Not to mention, there are also historical factors at play here that complicate things further. As a former communist country, much of Romania's natural resources, like its forests, were controlled by the state during that period of its history. They were nationalized. When communism fell, these resources underwent a period of privatization where many of Romania's forests came under the control of private logging companies who deforested them. Logging, both legal and illegal, remains one of the biggest challenges in this region today, and one of the biggest reasons the national park effort is even being undertaken. Romania, historically, also doesn't have a very good relationship with its national parks and protected areas. Romania is full of beautiful landscapes, but its national parks have not typically been associated with these landscapes. They haven't included very good visitor infrastructure, interpretation, there's been no real ranger presence, and a wide history of mismanagement. Parks were seen by the locals only for the restrictions they imposed rather than the opportunities they presented. Local communities felt isolated by the presence of these parks. The proposed Fagaras Mountains National Park is aiming to change that. The goal of this national park is to be the Yellowstone of Europe, to be an iconic flagship national park, not just for Romania, but for all of Europe. It has the scenery, it has the biodiversity, it has all the makings of a fantastic park. It just needs the park part, the administration and management and investment that turns a beautiful piece of scenery into a protected place that people want to visit and that will benefit the local communities and that will ultimately properly protect this landscape. So how is that supposed to happen? How do we get from beautiful scenery with a lot of potential to flagship national park? Well, in the case of the Fagaras Mountains, this effort is actually being led by a nonprofit called Foundation Conservation Carpathia. And their strategy for creating this park is actually pretty multifaceted. The first piece of the puzzle is about the land. If you want a national park, you gotta have land. Foundation Conservation Carpathia is buying and acquiring the land. They've acquired more than 66,000 acres so far, and the land they've acquired has been a mixture of that primeval old-growth forest, along with degraded, deforested areas that have suffered from legal and illegal logging. In those areas that are degraded or deforested, they're restoring and rewilding them. Forests are being replanted, species are being reintroduced. In addition to acquiring land as well, they're also buying hunting rights in this area, nearly 200,000 acres so far. Not to hunt, but to protect wildlife. The goal here is to obviously acquire or manage enough land to create a national park. Yes, that's the overall goal, but embedded within that goal is the preservation of an entire ecosystem and landscape, one of the last true wildernesses in Europe. The goal here is to acquire or manage enough land to preserve this ecosystem and allow normal ecosystem processes to occur uninterrupted, and then protect that ecosystem as a national park. So that's sort of like the bread and butter of this conservation effort, right? Conservation, creating a national park, protecting ecosystems, that requires land. FCC's goal is to acquire enough land in this area to actually then turn it over to the Romanian government, return it to the public domain as part of the existing national park system under a specific management agreement with the principles we talked about earlier already put in place. That sort of bottom-up, locally driven form of conservation where local communities and ecosystems benefit from the national park's presence. But the land piece, the ecosystem preservation piece of this whole national park puzzle is just that, a piece. Another piece is the local communities, the people who live here. We talked about this earlier, but a park like this does not go ahead unless it has the support of the local communities and they benefit from it being created, which again is a steep barrier to overcome. Remember that the history of national parks in Romania has often been filled with mismanagement, mistrust, and dysfunction. The benefits of these parks have traditionally not accrued to the locals on whose land and landscapes they have been placed. They have always associated these parks with broken promises and restrictions rather than opportunities. Part of the work that Foundation Conservation Carpathia is doing, in addition to acquiring land, is showing that this park can be beneficial to these local communities. That the history of national parks in Romania does not have to repeat itself, and that the Fagaras Mountains National Park can be created in such a way that protects this ancient wild landscape while benefiting the communities which call it home. That's why the Forest of Immortal Stories is such an important piece of this larger national park effort. It's a locally led conservation initiative whose benefits accrue to the local community. It is an example of conservation and park building done right in this area of Romania. And it's what Foundation Conservation Carpathia and all the proponents of the proposed Fagaras Mountains National Park hope to emulate on a much larger scale, a national park scale. To show that, hey, we can do conservation here and you, the locals, can benefit and be a part of it. That's the goal. And so far, it seems to be working. The Forest of Immortal Stories has received lots of coverage. It's been featured in the New York Times, The Guardian, The Lonely Planet. I made a video about it last week, as I said. It's receiving lots of positive attention, and it's attracting visitors, eco-tourists, to this area of Romania and improving its economy. It is showcasing, successfully, what it might look like to build a national park in the Fagaras Mountains of Romania. A national park that would be truly fitting for this area. It is the largest remaining wilderness left in Europe. It is home to the continent's highest concentrations of brown bears, Eurasian lynx, and wolves. Bison have been returned to this landscape. It is home to the largest remaining swaths of old-growth forest on the continent. Truly, it is the Yellowstone of Europe, and it is deserving of a national park that protects this ecosystem and benefits those people and communities who are lucky enough to call it home. So there you have it, the story of the Yellowstone of Europe, the proposed Fagaras Mountains National Park in Romania. I love learning and talking about these conservation efforts in other countries because they expose me to different thoughts and ideas about how conservation should be done. I went to Japan a few months ago and learned about their unique approach to conservation. I learned about this story and conservation of the Carpathians, and they've both just widened my horizons. They've made me a better conservationist by expanding my point of view. But I want to know what you think. What's your take on the Fagaras Mountains National Park? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and a special thanks to Foundation Conservation Carpathia for speaking to me about this project and the Forest of Immortal Stories. I'll leave a link to their website in the description if you want to learn more about their efforts. There's also a link to my Patreon down there if you want to support my work more directly, and a link to my Instagram if you want to follow along over there and see my pretty pictures of all my park adventures and stuff like that. That is all I have for you. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.